Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to chat with you guys a little bit about opposing muscle group supersets. I do a wide variety of different ones of these, over the last year on camera. And for me, this is my preferred training modality, other than when I am doing really heavy singles, like say on the bench press, or if I am doing squats and deadlifts. Those are the only time I don't do these. So for me, almost every other exercise that I do is done as antagonistic muscle group supersets. So examples will be the things you see me do here. These were all done as part of supersets. So for example, I like to do bench press followed by chin-ups or pull-ups, right? And so what that means as a superset, for those unaware, these are not same muscle group supersets. These are opposing muscle groups. So in other words, the opposite side of the joint. So training chest and back to back. Training triceps and biceps back to back. Quads and hamstrings. These are perfect examples. And in fact, it works more than just chest and back. So when you see me doing the bench press, it's not just pecs, it's obviously triceps. It's obviously front delts involved. Same thing when we get over to pull-ups and chin-ups. Yes, we're working the lats, but we're working the rear delts, all those other muscles of the upper back and the biceps. So even when we do pushing and pulling like that, it's still an opposing muscle group for the arms, for the shoulders, all of that, even though the delts are technically one muscle. They have a lot of different functions. And I really like training this way for a number of reasons. So the same thing here, you'll see me doing tricep extensions and then curls. So what happens when we do that is you do a set of bench, then you do a set of pull-ups. Then you do your set of bench again, then you do a set of pull-ups. And so when we're doing this, people would say, so what's the point then if it's not the same muscle? Well, that's the beauty of it. When it is opposing muscles, what you find is that it doesn't impede your performance. Unless you are cardiovascularly out of shape and that's limiting you, what you tend to find is that if you do a set of pull-ups after every set of bench, you don't find that you can do less pull-ups. In other words, it doesn't seem to weaken you. Okay? And this is an important point, and there's a reason I like this. It's not about just the conditioning side, but it can help with conditioning, right? Because we're doing, multiple exercises back to back. It does keep your heart rate and breathing up. It can add to some of your conditioning training. It can absolutely be a tool there. But the thing that it does is that it really cuts down time, because one of the things that we know from the research, for training the same muscle, taking longer breaks tends to produce more muscle growth. Why? Because we have better performance. And the reason we suspect that is because it gives the fastest twitch muscle fibers time to recover so that they can be used again completely. Right? Because in order for them to grow, they need to be repeatedly placed under tension. But if our breaks are too short, not all of the upper threshold or fast twitch muscle fibers have time to recover enough to be reused. So your performance starts dropping set to set. And that drop in performance, even if you're training to failure, it doesn't mean you're using all the muscle fibers. People say, well, if you're training to failure, then they're all being used. If you're fresh. But if your breaks are so short that you're hitting failure again because sooner or easier than you would normally, it's because those muscle fibers are too fatigued to facilitate that. So we know based on the research, taking 3-minute or longer breaks between training the same muscle again tends to have a larger and more robust training response. Well, that ends up being really time consuming. A lot of people are like, man, you end up spending just to even do, 10 sets for a muscle a week. That can be a long time in the gym, right? Just for your bench pressing and stuff. But what if you have something you can do between? Because a lot of times people will try to jump around and hop around. Everyone's like, no, you should be recovering. But in this case, what are we getting from it? We're doing something between the sets. And we're doing something that's productive that doesn't interfere, because when we train the opposing muscle groups, what happens? So let's say you did a set of bench press and then you do a set of pull-ups or rows. What is happening with the support muscles each time? So if you just trained your triceps and your chest with a set, they're pumped and everything, right? Well, it does a couple things. Number one, it helps stabilize the joint better on the other exercise. because those are the muscles that support it. They're not actively involved in the lift, so be clear there. They're not working per se, but they are stabilizing. If they're more pumped, what happens? They can offer a little more stability and cushion on the other side of the joint. Well, that in some cases may produce better performance. That's been noted sometimes at some squat pattern movements like presses and things, that if your hamstrings are pumped, sometimes we stabilize them a little better knee joint stability. Okay? So it's the same thing with these, right? You have that, but then what happens? On every rep, every time you do a row or a pull-up, what happens to your pectorals and your triceps? They get stretched, right? They get subjected to a dynamic stretch. Okay, that helps get some blood flow to them, helps clear some blood out of them, helps possibly clear a little bit of waste products, just a little bit of light pumping in between. But it's not fatiguing them because they're not being trained, they're just being lightly stretched. Okay, we can make a case that may help with recovery between the sets. All right, that's a good thing. All right, so here's what we're getting out of it. Our performance is not degraded. In other words, you're going to find that, let's say your bench sets or whatever, and you're taking a nice long break where you're doing a pull-up or a row in between, you don't get weaker at the sets of bench from doing it. So what it lets you do is take these long workouts with the longer breaks and cut them in half. It can cut your training time down. You can turn an hour and a half workout into a 45 or 50-minute workout this way, as long as you're training opposing muscle groups in the same day. You can cut the gym time down. Creates better stability on those other lifts, the big lifts. Okay? Cuts time down. And here's the other thing, it gives a hell of a pump. I think particularly, you don't notice it as much on that, but when it comes to arms or legs, when you train those opposing groups back and forth, triceps and biceps back and forth, you get a really serious arm pump. Same thing with the legs. You get a really pronounced pump training them that way, right? Because you're still maintaining part of that pump on the opposite muscle group, even though you've stretched it and pulled a little bit, so that pump tends to stay. And it just creates an interesting feeling. Like it just like you can tell that those muscles are really being trained. You're getting that deep pump, and then, of course, that pump is maintained and everything is stretched and pumped back and forth. Again, it's an interesting training response. And we don't know for sure. I can't argue and say, hey, that's going to cause muscle growth, that part. But it's an interesting training feeling. It does make you feel productive. But we know on the other, it lets you get the same amount of work and same amount of muscle fiber recruitment in two separate muscle groups for the same amount of time. That's kind of a big deal. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I'll talk to you guys next time.